Good afternoon, everyone. I'm speaking to you today from the city of Lviv in western Ukraine, from where WHO is coordinating its activities within the country. Today is World Health Day, the day on which the World Health Organization was founded 74 years ago in the aftermath of the Second World War, to uphold the principle that health is a human right and all people should enjoy the highest standard of health. As a medical doctor myself, I am here in Ukraine to stand in solidarity with the healthcare workers in the country. I thank them from the bottom of my heart for their dedication and professionalism as they continue to deliver care in the face of unimaginable human suffering and in scenes of total devastation that no nurse, doctor, midwife, ambulance driver, pharmacist, therapist, or social worker should ever have to experience. This visit provides me with a unique opportunity to talk to frontline health workers, patients, local and national authorities, and gather insights on the immediate and longer-term health needs in the country, and to find the best ways for WHO and its partners to deliver assistance. On this World Health Day, I reiterate WHO's determination to provide health for all, wherever they are across the 53 countries of Europe and Central Asia. We seek to ensure that everyone, in whatever circumstances, will not be deprived of the medicines, treatment and care they may need. As our WHO Director General, Dr. Tedros, said on the 6th of March, and I stand with him, WHO has been asking the Russian Federation for a ceasefire immediately, which includes unhindered access to humanitarian assistance for those in need. In the current situation, WHO's overarching goal is to ensure that people have sustained access to essential healthcare and that we can respond to changing health needs due to the war. Our activities are based around three priorities. Firstly, to keep health services operational in Ukraine. Even before the 24th of February, we were pre-positioning supplies, and since then we have been working closely with national and local authorities and more than 80 partners to maintain services across the country. We have delivered over 185 tons of medical supplies to the hardest hit areas on the country, reaching 500,000 people with materials to support trauma, surgery and primary healthcare. Last week we were able to bring in supplies to the encircled city of Sumy. A further 125 tons of essential items are also on their way. Assistive products, wheelchairs, other mobility aids, communication aids for the blind are in transit and will be distributed across Ukraine soon. An estimated 260,000 people are living with HIV in Ukraine. Just this week, together with the United States President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR, the Ukrainian authorities and partners, we have made sure that the supply of antiretroviral drugs to cover the needs of every person known to be living with HIV in Ukraine will be met for the next 12 months. We have a fully functional office in Lviv and are setting up an operational base in Dnipro in East Central Ukraine to mobilize resources more quickly and reach some of the most vulnerable people in conflict zones with urgent supplies. Given the uncertainties of the current situation, there are no assurances that the war will not get worse. WHO is considering all scenarios and making contingencies for different situations that could afflict the people of Ukraine, from the continued treatment of mass casualties to chemical assaults. Our second priority is to work with Ukraine's neighbors, with countries across the entire European region and beyond, to ensure that the health needs of those fleeing the war are met, treatment and care for refugees with special needs are maintained, and the health systems of host countries can manage these large influxes of people. So far, more than 4.2 million people have fled Ukraine since the 24th of February. I warmly thank the destination countries across the region for their commitment to extend health services to those arriving, but acknowledge that providing this is challenging and stretching already overburdened systems. We are working with national authorities to bridge gaps and help deliver supplies where needed for services such as routine childhood immunization. WHO is also coordinating with the European Union to triage patients arriving to make sure that they are received in an EU country that is best placed to treat them. We are channeling support from further afield. The Asia-Europe Foundation has provided $9.5 million from Japan to procure much-needed equipment and provide services to manage COVID-19 as well as communicable diseases, including measles and polio, for Ukraine and its neighbors. Thirdly, we are supporting the Ministry of Health to rebuild Ukraine's health system back better. WHO has had a presence on the ground in Ukraine since 1994, supporting the country to strengthen its health system, especially in primary health care and health financing. Since 2015 and until the 24th February this year, the government of Ukraine had been in the process of reforming the entire health system, moving towards universal health coverage. The country had been making excellent progress on specific challenges, turning the corner in its fight against tuberculosis and HIV. Ukraine was a beacon of best practice in Eastern Europe, with TB incidents falling by almost half in the past 15 years, thanks to the investment in modern diagnostic technologies to rapidly identify TB infection and effective treatment regimens for multi-drug-resistant tuberculosis. Despite the war, we are determined to support Ukraine and not to lose this momentum. WHO is preparing now to redeploy teams throughout the countries as access and security improves. We are committed to work through a strong, decentralized footprint, both during the current humanitarian response, but also to be there with local and national authorities to rebuild the war-torn health system. Health requires peace. Well-being requires hope. And healing requires time. I speak on behalf of the entire WHO family when I say that it is my deepest wish that this war comes to an end swiftly, without further loss of life. Tragically, this is not the reality we see. As of today, WHO has verified 91 attacks on health. Routine immunization coverage for polio and measles is below the threshold for population immunity. 50% of Ukraine's pharmacies are presumed closed, and 1,000 health facilities are in proximity to conflict areas or in changed areas of control. Roughly 80,000 babies will be born over the next 3 months with insufficient pre- and postnatal care available due to the war. In these dark days, let me reassure you that WHO is committed to be in Ukraine in the short and long term, addressing immediate health challenges and future reconstruction needs. I'd like once again to express my deep admiration to all frontline workers in Ukraine protecting the health of the people. Our mandate and humanitarian principles call on us to ensure health for all, including the poor and most vulnerable, wherever they may be. We have prepared for different eventualities, anticipating that health challenges will get worse before they get better. But as WHO's long history and experience shows, they will eventually get better. The life-saving medicine Ukraine needs right now is peace. Thank you.
Regional Director for that, and I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Banu Bhatnagar. I'm the Press and Media Relations Officer at WHO Europe. I'll be leading the Q&A session now. So without further ado, if there are any questions from the floor, can we get a microphone over to this gentleman, please? Thank you very much. If you could please introduce yourself and your outlet, and then ask your question. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Dr. Kluger. This is Tomo Deguchi with Kyoto, Japanese news agency. Just would like to ask you a question about the things that you have just mentioned. You have seen the very many attacks on the medical facilities during this crisis. How do you define these acts? From my point of view, it's nothing less than a war crime. Thank you.
On health, we define attacks on health, but this can include healthcare workers, ambulances, hospital facilities. As of today, I was mentioning, there are more than 19 verified by WHO following a standard international procedure, which is publicly available. This is clearly a breach of international humanitarian law. It's not up to the mandate of WHO to attribute them, but we verify them. We don't have the mandate nor capabilities of that one. But this is something that Dr. Tedros and me, from the very beginning, have been calling explicitly immediately to stop. A hospital, a health facility has to be a safe place. Dr. Habib, would you like to say something?
Thank you. And I just want to add what Dr. Kluge was mentioning as well. It's 91 attacks. It is 12 which are on supplies and ambulances. There are a number of hospitals. And what we need to realize that it is taking away the hope, because hospitals and the healthcare facilities are the places where people go to be treated and healed. And we know that in Ukraine now, 6.4 million people are in move. And we know, as was mentioned, 1,000 facilities are in the close proximity in hostilities, all the territories where the active fighting is going. So from the health perspective and the World Health Day, it is very, very important that we ensure access to the healthcare as same way as we're asking for the humanitarian convoys. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that was Dr. Jarno Habic, WHO representative for Ukraine. So we have another question from the floor, this gentleman in the back.
Thank you. I'm Michael Bosicki with CNN Opinion. Doctor, I had a question for you. Recently, President Zelensky spoke at the UN Security Council, and he gave a very critical speech about the UN, saying it's badly in need of reform. And I think it's one of the most critical speeches a leader has given about the UN. My question is the following. In the first few weeks of the conflict, when arguably the worst violence was taking place, your Director General couldn't bring himself to even name the aggressor Russia, nor did a lot of UN agencies even use the word war or invasion. They used the word escalating conflict. Can you explain that? Maybe we can call it a lapse or policy, and why did that happen? Because I think it's an important question, because it was noticed here in Ukraine, and when the people are questioning the UN's credibility, including WHO, I think it's something that needs to be addressed, and I had a follow-up if I could. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Very important. So each UN agency has its particular mandates. Our mandate is to bring life-saving healthcare to the vulnerable people. This is our top priority, and since the first day, in fact, even before the war started, everyone of WHO, I can assure you, have been giving itself 24/7 to help the authorities, national and local. It is the mandate of the United Nations Secretary General, who has the political mandate to call out individual countries, which have been doing. As I mentioned in my statement, also WHO Director General had called, as of beginning of March, on the Russian Federation for a ceasefire to allow for humanitarian supplies.
Okay, and a follow-up if I can. It might be argued that we're in a worst-case scenario as a humanitarian community with ICR staff actually being held by the Russian Federation troops, humanitarian corridors that have been negotiated between Ukraine and Russia not respected, that they're actually being fired upon. Are we in a bad place, so to speak, in terms of being able to deliver life-saving aid when the other side is not respecting agreements for access? Thank you.
WHO has been able to deliver life-saving supplies to many affected areas, but it's true, some remain very difficult. I think a priority, definitely, I think we all agree, would be Mariupol, and I would like to take the opportunity here to express again my really admiration to all the frontline workers. I have been working, I had the opportunity to work in this country for many, many years, and I always have been very impressed by the resilience of the people and the heroism of the frontline workers, and that's why, again, I decided out of the 50 countries with World Health Day to be here really with the Ukrainian people and healthcare workers.
Would you like to say something, please? Dr. Habic.
Thank you. And just to add what Dr. Kluge was mentioning, there is a bit of hope. We have delivered 2 convoys to Sumy, but at the same time, we are constantly asking the humanitarian convoys, Mariupol, what was mentioned, as well as Donetsk, Luhansk, because as a WHO, our priority is to really deliver to hard-to-reach places. We are here now in the press conference in Lviv, but majority our supplies from 185 tons have gone to the east. And yesterday also to Kiev Oblast, where a number of areas were liberated. So it's important that we constantly do and deliver, but we need to ask that daily because people's needs are increasing every day.
Thank you very much, Dr. Habic. Let's take a question from online, our Zoom participants. If I can maybe go to Emma Farge from Reuters. Emma, if you could unmute yourself and please ask your question.
Good afternoon. It's seeking a little bit of clarity on something said by the Regional Director, Kluge. If you could comment further on what you meant by chemical assaults and preparation that you're doing for those. What specifically are you stocking up on? Iodine, nuclear contamination drugs? And at what scale? And a quick follow-up, if I may, at the end. Thanks.
Would you like to take it?
Thank you. So WHO is assisting the authorities in for all eventualities. It includes indeed chemical assaults, but also other technological events and mass casualties to be prepared as best as possible. For details, I would like to give to Heather, who is the incident manager here in Ukraine.
So this is Dr. Heather Popovich, incident manager in Ukraine.
Thank you. So just looking at the chemical hazards, Ukraine is an industrial country. So there's chemical hazards throughout the country, and these can be affected by the war and can be, can be hit by different assaults. So what WHO does is to really work with the health authorities, to train health authorities. We've trained over 1,000 health workers and partners, actually 1,500 over the last week. We provide guidelines and supplies. So our role really is to work with the health sector, to train them, to give them the knowledge and tools that they need, and to protect the health of the people. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Popovich. Let's take another question here from the floor. If you could introduce yourself, please. Thank you. Sorry, let me just put my...
Доброго дня, телеканал 1.
Hello, Natalka Volosotska, 1+1 TV channel. Do you have an approximate number of people who died because they couldn't get care, because they were in the shelters, under the rubbles? And do you have the information about the spread of some untypical diseases? Because there were rumors about the chickenpox in the areas of combat.
Information or data about people that have died as a result of not receiving care? That's the first part of the question. And the other part of the question is, what is our information about the potential spread of infectious diseases as a result of this conflict?
Well, let me start with the infectious diseases. War is a risk to public health. With the destruction of health facilities, the lack of access to health facilities, people on the move, people living in shelters and basements and crowded together puts everybody at risk for infectious diseases. And starting before, if the prevention measures such as vaccinations, and as the regional director has said, the vaccination for measles and polio in the country is already low. We have been managed before the war to have a coverage of COVID vaccination of over 40%, and we've lost gains in that. So all of these puts the most vulnerable at risk, which are the elderly, the children, and the pregnant women. And this risk continues through their journey and into the other countries. So we're working with the government and partners to assess the risk, to purchase the necessary medicines and vaccines, and to really enhance vaccination coverage for some of these diseases. So.
Thank you, Dr. Pavlovitz. Dr. Habic, if you'd like to comment on the first part of the question.
Thank you. And when we look across the whole country, and we look to the east part where the hostilities are happening, we know about number of patients and people who have not had access to the insulin for 2 to 3 weeks. We know that there is a disruption of regular health services. And when we look what are the needs, what the authorities are asking, these are mainly trauma and surgery kits. So definitely there are people who have not had access to care. When we are here or more western part, we know that number of births are delivered here. Number of people have had access to care. But the situation is very different from 6 weeks ago, when this was a country where we discussed with authorities how to reform primary care, how to make the hospitals modern, how to ensure digital services that we can really foster the development. So my answer is yes, there are issues on access to care, and that's why we talk about universal health coverage. That's why we talk that we need to deliver more, and collectively, especially also as 6.4 million people are in the move. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Habic. Let's take another question from our Zoom participants. So let's this time go to Peter Kenny at the Anadolu Agency. Peter, please ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering if you could clarify what happened at the beginning of the press conference, because I know this wasn't a raid on a health facility, but for those of us who are not there, it looked like you moved underground. Could you just describe what happened and in the circumstances in which your press conference has taken place? Thank you, Dr. Kluger.
Thanks, Peter. If you don't mind, I'll handle this. It was an air raid siren which go off regularly in the Lviv and surrounding area, based on an assessment of whether there might have been some risk or there might have been some military activity nearby. So we weren't in any danger, but I can understand that it might have seemed that way. And so when an air raid siren happens, the entire everyone in the building had to go into the basement. We then started to do the press conference from there, but then the siren was lifted and we resumed proceedings upstairs. So I hope that clarifies for you. So let's take the next question here from Deutsche Welle.
Hi, Rebecca Ritters, Deutsche Welle News. You mentioned preparations for a potential chemical attack. I'm just wondering whether that is also for the worst case scenario, of course, of a nuclear either attack or accident.
Heather?
I think the worst case scenario really is what we're seeing now, which is the lack of access to healthcare and the trauma. So we're already seeing people dying and getting injured from the war. And then with the lack of access to healthcare, as my colleagues have already mentioned, people are going to start dying from common causes, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, children for potentially measles, common things like pneumonia and diarrhea from children, which are very simple to treat when you have access to healthcare, is going to be an issue. So I think what we're really worried about now is the access to healthcare and the ability to really save lives from trauma and from the disruption of health services.
Perhaps my question wasn't worded correctly. Worst case scenario, of course, is every moment of every day at the moment, but are there preparations being made for a potential nuclear attack or accident?
So the management of and the oversight of these is not for WHO. So again, what we do is we work with health authorities to train them, to provide guidance and supplies to help the health workforce and to give health communication messages to people. So we really stick with the health sector and we make sure that everything is available to them in order to manage any health threats from that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Papovich. Let's go online now to, and apologies if I'm mispronouncing, Giedre Peserkite from Euractiv. Please ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much for taking my question. I was wondering, as Ukraine has the 4th highest tuberculosis incidence rate in WHO EU region, could you please brief us on what is the situation in Ukraine regarding tuberculosis at the moment, as millions are displaced, and also for the countries accepting refugees, what are the main concerns regarding tuberculosis, and is there any guidelines coming from WHO anytime soon?
Great.
Thank you.
Regional Director?
Yes, indeed, Ukraine has been what we call a high-burden country for tuberculosis and multi-drug tuberculosis. But as I was mentioning, was doing an amazing job, including innovations like quick, rapid diagnostic tests. About 1 out of 3 patients has a form of resistance. But there are clear guidelines. The healthcare workers in Ukraine know very well how to manage tuberculosis. So the key issue is to ensure continuation of treatment so that there is no amplification of resistance. This is number 1. Number 2, important, and we are working on that one. Actually, yesterday I had a meeting with the Minister of Health, Finance and Foreign Affairs of Poland in Warsaw, that the neighboring countries continue that treatment. Yesterday evening there was a law being passed in the parliament in Poland on the issue to allow WHO pre-qualified tuberculosis drugs which we are used and procured in the country also to be used in the neighboring countries, like a kind of a fast-track registration to allow for continuation.
Is that all right? Great. Let's take another question online from Carlo Martuccelli from Politico. Carlo.
Yes, hi. Thank you for taking my question. Dr. Popovits mentioned that Ukraine is an industrial country and that there are chemical hazards throughout the country. But she didn't mention specifically the possibility of a Russian chemical attack on the population. I wanted to know, does the WHO not envisage that as a threat or possibility? Thank you.
I mean, the short answer is that WHO is preparing for any eventuality. Again, without our mandate, I mean, the issue was mentioned about nuclear threats, and there we're collaborating, for example, with the International Atomic Agency in Vienna, so in partnership. But we have to be ready basically for any eventuality while managing, as Dr. Popovits was telling, for the bulk of the health needs as of today, which are well known, which are respiratory diseases, and of course, we didn't speak yet about mental health and psychosocial support, which is obviously a huge one, and that always calling upon governments and partners to triple their efforts on mental health, particularly for the youth.
Thank you very much. I believe Emma Farge from Reuters has a follow-up question.
Yes, thanks a lot. It's actually on biological risks. The WHO recommended at the start of the conflict that Ukraine destroy all pathogens in its laboratories. Perhaps you could tell us whether that has been done in all laboratories, and are you confident now that there's zero risk of those pathogens getting out? Thanks.
Dr. Habic.
Thank you. And WHO, as in all the countries, works closely with health authorities to share our guidelines. And we had discussion on what to do in the laboratories. But at the same time, it is important to notice that WHO is not an inspection agency to check what all was done. So we had discussions with authorities and health authorities in particular, but we are not inspecting the laboratories. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hope that answers your question. We'll take a final question now, and we need to wrap up from James Keaton from AP. James, please ask your question.
Thanks, Banu. And nice to see you all in Lviv. Dr. Kluge, I wanted to find out if you have had any of your teams have been looking at the types of trauma that had been suffered by either people who have been killed or survivors of some of the violence in the area near Irpin, Bucha, et cetera, and what types of trauma that you have seen that might be consistent with you know, whether it be rape or various other types of abuses, on civilians?
I think that's one for Dr. Habic, if you don't mind, James. So we'll hand the floor to Jarno.
Thank you. And WHO, when we look to the trauma and injuries, our priority is to deliver the supplies that reach to civilians, and particularly in hard-to-reach places. And this is what WHO has been doing. When it comes to the type of trauma or injury, we are not doing the investigation on those. At the same time, we are also monitoring on the health status, and there are a number of other UN agencies, including UNFPA, others, who are also getting the signals and doing their follow-up on those matters. Thank you.
Yes, so just before we close, I'm going to hand the floor.
Yes, as an addition to that one, Jamie, so as I was mentioning, every agency has its mandate, so the Human Rights Council has appointed an independent international commission of inquiry to investigate alleged abuses of human rights, and they will give a report in September 2022, and as in the past, if and when WHO will be asked to collaborate in such an investigation within our mandate and capabilities, we will do so.
Thank you very much, Regional Director, for those final remarks. And with that concludes our press briefing from here in Lviv on World Health Day. If you have any follow-up questions or need some additional information, please do email us at eupress@who.int. Thank you very much. Do take care and goodbye.